very warm welcome to all of you on behalf of GIZ and the Fabric program. So I'm really happy to see that we have again more than 150 participants in this event after our successful launch last week. And I would like to thank you all for joining, but of course, especially also like to share our three panelists today, that they are available and that they are willing to share their perspectives with us. Last week, we heard from the producers. So this week, we are hearing from the brands, and I think this is going to be really a very interesting discussion. As you said, we usually do this every 2 weeks. After this, we're going to have a very a little bit larger gap of 3 weeks because of the Ramadan in some of our countries. But on June the 2nd, we will discuss the important topic of business resilience in the times of crisis. So this is to come soon. Getting through the crisis together is the title of our webinar series, and this aspect of bringing people and different perspectives together really also describes the core of the Fabric program. Fabric is a regional program working in 6 countries, that is Bangladesh, Pakistan, Myanmar, Cambodia, Vietnam, and China. As Joost already mentioned, it is implemented by GIZ, funded by the German government, specifically by the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. And our overall objective is, of course, to contribute together with our partners from government, private sector, and civil society to fostering sustainability of the garment and textile industry. And we are a regional program. That means really our core focus is on fostering the regional exchange. We believe that there is a lot of knowledge and expertise in the region, in the Asian producing countries. So our specific objective is really to bring people together in the region, bring producers together, bring governments together who kind of have to address very similar problems, help them to exchange, help them to find the good practices that are in the region, and to implement them in order to promote the long-term sustainability of the industry. And currently, of course, there's no topic that is more important than the Corona crisis in the sector. So, of course, the objective of these webinars is then also to strengthen the exchange of the different actors affected and to explore how we can better work together to mitigate some of the effects of this crisis. Last week, in our first webinar, we actually provided a pretty detailed overview of the current status of the impact of the crisis in our partner countries. So let me now just share a very few updates. I think that a lot of our participants are actually from Europe as well, where I mean, Germany, for example, where we see very slowly kind of maybe you can call it a normalization of daily living conditions. And this is partly also true in some of the Asian countries. However, normalization is really not in sight for the workers in the global supply chains who continue to be really hard hit by the crisis. So in Cambodia, for example, there are now 200 factories closed, and there are a lot more than 100,000 workers out of their jobs. In Myanmar, there are factory inspections still continuing, but many factories are closed in order to make necessary adjustments to ensure compliance. There's very little data, but it is estimated that more than 40,000 workers are actually affected by these factory closures. Bangladesh and Pakistan see a partial phasing out of lockdowns, but of course, drastic financial problems are faced by the factories due to missing orders. Vietnam, to mention that last, is easing the nationwide social distancing, but it is estimated that 78% of total laborers in the transport, footwear, and garment sector are affected by the crisis. So definitely and you know that it continues to be a very dramatic situation with very severe social consequences in the countries where fabric is active. And I'm sure our panelists will discuss this also today. So this is really an event for exchange and discussion. And of course, I don't want to take more time away from that. Again, thank you for participating. Thanks to the panelists, and back to you, Joost. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. So thanks also for reminding us of some quite dramatic figures. So, however, today's webinar is actually focusing on the viewpoint of brands and discuss how brands have been impacted by COVID-19, what response measures they have taken, what the pandemic means for sustainability goals of the industry, and last but not least, we want to take an outlook for the next few months. Mark mentioned a lot about cooperation, knowledge exchange, collaboration. So we have a small poll for you before we kick off. So I will start this poll. I understand if you might come with your telephone, you might not see it, but I hope many of you now see the poll. We have 173 people logged in, and I hope that everybody sees the poll now. And so the question is, in your view, how well are we all doing when it comes to collaborating and overcoming the crisis? And you might want to overthink it because it depends who you are thinking about, but maybe the first gut feeling is the right feeling. So just type it in and think. And I will show you the results, and also our speakers, who I will introduce in a minute, can see. I see that we have about half of the participants finishing. I have this kind of counter here. So 30% have not started to think about it. So 5 would be excellent, 1 would be very poorly. So I'm going to close the poll in about 20 seconds from now. So last chance. So if you don't like these polls, no worries. We don't know what you are actually choosing. And I will show the results now. And you have 20 seconds to. And then we can have a quick look before we kick off the webinar properly with our questions for our panelists. Okay, so you should be able to see the poll results in a second and share with attendees, apply. So can you see the results? Okay, so seems there is area for improvement. And hopefully we take a small step today to also have maybe a good understanding of each other's perspective. As I said today, the brand's perspective. So I will now have to find the button for close the poll, and I hope is the poll gone? Yes, okay, good. So then let's start with our webinar. We have 3 interesting guests, and let me start with Matthias Distelmann. You can see him actually on the video. He has served as a company CEO for 3 years for the company Brands Fashion. In January, he has become the CEO of Brands Fashion. It's Europe's market leader, as I understand, for sustainable workwear. He has also worked many years leading the sourcing offices in Bangladesh and China with a main focus on quality and compliance assurance. And I understand that the products of Brand Fashion are certified with GOTS and Fair Trade or Made in Green by Oekotex, Cradle to Cradle, and the Green Button. So sustainability seems to be a topic that's part and parcel of your work. Our next speaker is Maren Bartel. She's the Director of the Strategic Account Development, or Director of Strategic Account Development at Elevate. Elevate is a business risk and sustainability solution provider, and she works very closely with European brands and retailers and help customers to optimize their supply chain, responsible sourcing programs, and drive improved performance throughout the value chain. She brings a lot of experience also from having worked in Istanbul, in Shanghai. She worked for CBR Fashion Holdings as a head of CSR and sustainability, and also for the Otto Group, implementing social program in sourcing countries. Welcome, Maren. And then now, finally, I would like you to introduce Jürgen Jansen. Jürgen is heading the secretariat of the Partnership for Sustainable Textiles. I think in German we say Textilbündnis. It's a multi-stakeholder initiative which brings together members from the industry, companies and associations, NGOs, trade unions, standards organizations, and also the German federal government. And the partnership strives to improve conditions in global textile supply networks, from the production of raw materials to the disposal of textiles. And I understand, Jürgen, you were also a coordinator and representative of the German Global Compact Network, and also represented that network on an international level as part of the UN Global Compact. Welcome, Jürgen, to our webinar. So let me start right away with a question for Matthias. I mean, Matthias, it's about 7-8 weeks since governments locked down because of coronavirus. We see, of course, dramatic changes also in your home country. McKinsey estimates that the global fashion industry will contract by some 30% in 2020, year on year. How has a brand like yours been impacted? How you mitigate the current risks? And what are your current activities? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Jus, and good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or whatever the time is where you're joining us. Yeah, well, when the crisis hit us in January, when it surfaced in January, we were firstly thinking very regional. And it was firstly for us, we were thinking into supply chains of Chinese fabric going into other countries. And then all of a sudden, everything became a bit wilder. And I was myself in India and in Bangladesh at that time. And for the first time, I was thinking, well, this can be an Asian crisis. So now, a couple of weeks later, we see this is a global crisis. And yes, we're all in this together. So what we did firstly is that we had to, in our headquarters here in Germany, we had to shut down in a way that we sent people working from home. We had to work in shifts in our warehouse in order to reduce the infection risk. So we're very much focused on ourselves, on staying afloat, on staying alive. And then, of course, we needed to look into our suppliers. The merchandise we were running before, which we definitely needed, was all of a sudden not so much of need anymore, because also a lot of our customers shut down. A couple of events were canceled. Let's say the European soccer event 2020 was canceled, which is, of course, also one of our business contributors. So that led us to the point when we say, well, how are we taking it from here? So we had a lot of talks with our customers not to cancel orders. We had a lot of talks with our suppliers who were immediately afraid that whatever they had produced was all of a sudden redundant and that we were not willing to take it. So we went public and said, no, we let's say, applied to everyone and appealed to everyone not to cancel orders, and let's find solution jointly in this. And what you just said, I mean, all is crystal ball right now, but 30% deduction in consumption of apparel, this is really a hit. And going forward, we have to see where this brings us and what this means on supply chains. And we are making day-to-day strategies here and trying to see what is best, and keeping up the sustainability, which is one of our core strategies, is a tough call in these times.
Thank you very much, Matthias. And we're going to talk more a little bit about the end of our question round. Maren, you have a broad overview on what's happening in the industry. What do you see happening on the ground right now, especially in the relationship between brands and suppliers? And what is the impact? And have you noticed a shift in the conversation in the last weeks?
Yeah, thank you very much, Jürgen. The industry really is impacted significantly. And I think it's quite shocking to see that the industry was not prepared. Nobody saw this coming. And I think it is obvious that nobody would really foresee the scope of this pandemic event. But I think we can also not say that there were no signs. I mean, we had SARS, we had the bird flu. I think we all could have been prepared in a better way. So this being said, we see a lot of responses in the industry, actually the whole wide range. We have order cancellations, which is going through the media as well. We see a lot of shifting to other markets, especially in the fast fashion industry, where the quick response markets, for example, Turkey, when they closed down, they were shifting to China and other markets that were slowly opening again. We see a lot of different reactions with regard to audits. Audits have been delayed, postponed, completely eliminated. Some brands explore new options like sort of remote assessments, which usually is a kind of self-assessment with desktop verification and some kind and scope of camera involvement. We see brands that explore the option of so-called COVID-19 assessments. So we see a whole range. What we also see is that corporations pause some or a lot of the social responsibility programs, or even put them on the back burner. So that is also quite shocking, I would say, that this falls off the rack, if you want to say so. The same applies for capacity building programs. We see a lot of capacity programs being suspended from the brand side, of course, taking lockdowns and closures into considerations, but also a lot of brands say we don't have the financial means, we are struggling to survive, so we have to put this on hold or cannot proceed with this. But interestingly, we see quite some requests from suppliers who then want to take this chance and are asking for capacity building programs. With regard to the relation between brands and suppliers, it's a wide topic. It's difficult to say that in a few sentences. But what I find striking is we hear a lot about the long-lasting relationships between suppliers and brands. But from experience and also from what we see now, it seems that this is often by coincidence. So these relationships evolve over time. But we especially now see very few brands that would give a forecast for the next 3 years. And even before COVID-19, you would hardly have agreements with suppliers on a strategic and long-lasting level. And what is maybe striking the most in the relationship between brands and suppliers is the lack of empathy. What we hear from brands, and we also are a lot in touch with the suppliers, and what we hear is, brands are asking, how are you doing? But then they often don't even wait for the answer. So then they go on and they say, okay, but we need to cancel the order, or we need a reduction on the price, on the pricing. Some of the brands have been asked up to 70% of price reductions, which then is, of course, forwarded by the suppliers, or often forwarded to cutting salaries of their workforce. So it's a vicious circle, and this is something that we observe as well. So lack of empathy is really quite striking. I wouldn't say that this is the rule. There are, of course, a lot of other examples as well. We may be talking about that later, but that is something that we are observing in the market right now.
Thank you, Maren. I find it very interesting that you mentioned what we call in future thinking the black swan. So was the industry prepared? Was it unexpected event, or could we have been prepared for that? I think that's a question that will be discussed all over the world right now. And of course, thank you for highlighting this vicious circle on the lack of empathy situation. Let me go over to Jürgen. Jürgen, no company will get through this pandemic alone, and fashion players need to share data, insights, and strategies on how to navigate the storm. This Partnership for Sustainable Textiles is facilitating a multi-stakeholder dialogue. So you are talking to your stakeholders probably on a daily basis. So how do they see the situation as a whole? And do you believe there can be a collective response?
Yeah, Joost, thank you for the opportunity to share some insight out of the perspectives of a multi-stakeholder initiative. So not just a brand, but a multi-stakeholder initiative with about 130 members that are joined under this common vision to improve a sustainable and more fair textile industry, especially with regards to the workers. And this vision, as we all know, and as my predecessors already said, is put to the test right now. And how does a multi-stakeholder initiative with the government in it, brands in it, business associations, NGOs, trade unions, and standard organizations in it, how can we respond to this one? I think there is in this actual crisis a very big business case for a collective response. So it is, in our opinion, in our expectation also, it's the question, do we collaborate or is everybody running for the hills? I think we've seen quite a bit of running for the hills in those past weeks, where everybody is trying to stay afloat and save liquidity. But we in the partnership, there has been a quick consensus with all stakeholders that this situation needs exceptional decisions. So what they did in the steering committee was to ease the burden for members, for example, postponing the review process and other measures. Also in the light saying that dead companies don't pay any bills. This also has to be quite clear, and Matthias provided a few data at the front how the situation is for single company. We are also looking into it from the perspective of flexibility, because we are facing an, as of today, unknown situation with a global supply and demand shock at the same time that leads to a liquidity crisis across the supply chain, with profitability a distant player in the whole thing. So there has to be some kind of common response from a multi-stakeholder initiative. And first of all, I think we had a group of companies and also NGOs coming together and sitting together and formulating some of the core expectations surrounding about the partnership approach, which goes a bit of contrary to what Maren just said about that the lack of empathy. What we see is that there is, at least in a part of our membership, that they say we are in this together, not just in the partnership, but also with our suppliers. Because if this crisis is over one day and there are no profitable suppliers left, then we have a long-term problem. So we are working on collective solutions and talk to many other organizations about what to do. And we also see that the normal choreography of things, so first make a plan, then execute it and whatever, this choreography is in this situation is very messy, because a lot of processes and talks and also decisions are running parallel, and maybe even in the wrong sequence, and this against the picture of a liquidity crisis. So a lot of things are happening, and where those activities come together as of today a bit, and Mark already told us that you have a next webinar with the ILO, that the ILO offered a call to action 2 weeks ago, And we, as a Partnership for Sustainable Textiles, together with other multi-stakeholder initiatives like the ETI, FLA, the Fair Wear Foundation, the Dutch Covenant, SAC, have joined the statement and supporting this approach. When we look at what are these approaches, you generally see that there are two different overall goals in it. The first one is still the short-time relief goal, which focuses strongly about buying practices in this crisis. So are the orders being paid? Are cancellations can be avoided? Will there be sanctions? What about additional rebates on textiles already produced and so on? But the second topic in this short-time response is that governments have to step in, because companies are cash-strapped, and governments have the ability and should have the ability to react. We see a bit of it in Bangladesh and probably also in a few other countries. And we also see that the initiator of the Partnership for Sustainable Textiles, the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, wants to push in this direction. In this situation, we see a very strong case for governments stepping in. And the second focus we are talking already about is that the long run, because a lot of companies and also NGOs and the trade unions have a feeling that the world after COVID-19 will be a different world, and the business as usual will not survive. So there is talk about what can be done at different fora, but as of today, because we are still early in these discussions, there are no clear paths towards a new normal. And one thing we also see, I think, that is very, very important is the concept of partnership and trust within supply chain, which somehow goes into the direction what Maren says when it comes to empathy. We also have a feeling that this trust is a very very difficult to attain in a situation like this. And I think it's like investing in soft power, right? If you have a trustful relationship built up in your own supply chain, it will give you, and this is my personal opinion, an edge after this crisis is over. Thank you.
Jürgen, maybe a quick follow-up question. Do you have the impression brands are starting to do things differently in the supply chain, or?
In the long run, we don't see it yet. I think that there is a big willingness of quite a few of our members to rethink their relationship and business relationship in the supply chain. Well, I cannot say as of today that they are already doing it really different, aside from being in crisis mode and staying afloat. This is different, but the new normal is still a bit cloudy.
Okay, thanks, Jürgen. Matthias, 2 weeks ago we had in our first webinar some interesting conversation, and it came out very clear the important role of brands to keep the industry afloat. So maybe can I ask you, with Brands Fashion, what has been your response so far, particular in regard to the suppliers? And could you also say something about more concrete how the situation has affected your CSR activities, your sustainability activities? I mean, I mentioned at the beginning that this is something to your heart. So, for instance, the previous CSR activities reduce the impact on suppliers? I mean,
yeah, like Maren said, of course, we knocked doors and said, hello, how are you? I hope we did this a little bit more empathy than what's happening in general. And I agree with her that in general, there's a lot of asking, but then again, everybody's looking at their own problems right now. So what we did, we have, let's say, core suppliers in India, for example, where we're taking 100% of his capacity, and that's more like knocking doors. So we were in constant contact with him. We have also financially helped him over this crisis, but this is nothing we really then put out into public. We have our own office in Bangladesh, and these people, they were also locked away. But then again, once the lockdown was easier in Bangladesh, they went to the factories, they made surveillances. Are these hygiene methods taking care, and how's the situation over there? Something what they sent to me as a video was really shocking, and we said, wow, this cannot be, this must be fake news. I believe it was real news. So we try to gain, let's say, a sort of an overview, which is difficult right now, sitting in home offices or sitting in offices just in front of a laptop. So when you're asking me, how is your CSR activity suffering? It is suffering that we are not able to fly over and have a look at it with our own eyes. And our sustainability strategy is based on transparency. And I think transparency is lacking behind. Of course, we have people over there on our paycheck, which I believe are doing 100% good job. But then again, they are also locked down in their homes. Partnership with makers, this collaboration, is, in my opinion, the absolute key to it. What we want to avoid, which is our strategy as an SME, is that we say we're not starting this price hopping right now. We are not, jumping from one maker to the other for the few cents down, because this would send exactly this price war on, and we don't want to be a participant in that. So that is what we have clearly decided. Other than that, and that's where I agree with Jürgen, is that we are very, very early in what is happening. So everybody is now looking at the whiteboard and thinking, okay, what will be the effect? What will be the effect on my company? What will be the effect on my partners, on the partner companies? But none of us really knows what's going on. Is it a 30% lockdown? Are we going into U-shape? So are things getting normal again? Well, we all doubt that, right? But let's say it's still an alternative out there. So we are preparing for it. We are investing now in digitalization. So we want to have more chances to see with videos, with whatever is possible in our factories with our partners, and we try to keep in contact as best as we can.
Thanks, Matthias. Maren, maybe your point on that. Have you seen some interesting examples how brands have responded to buyer concerns, and especially some inspiring examples of how brands have supported suppliers?
You mean how suppliers have responded to buyers' concerns?
Yes.
Well, I think we see a lot of very encouraging reactions. What we see is that the majority of the suppliers is very flexible, and they are trying by all means to fulfill the brands and the buyers' expectations, but mainly also by adhering to rules and protecting the workers. And that is a very positive reaction that we have observed, that the suppliers and the factories really try to ensure that their workers are safe, and that they take measures to keep up the business as well as possible. As an example, we have done several webinars starting in China in already February, wellness at work and returning safely to work. And these were webinars which gave very much of guidance to suppliers, how they can do risk monitoring and things. So it went far beyond wipes and hygiene. And we had to do it 3 or 4 times because the numbers were really so enormous. We had several thousand participants on the line attending these webinars, and then afterwards getting feedback also from suppliers, some of them even sending us videos how they implemented certain measures. So that is, I think, a very promising and a very positive sign amid all the bad news that we also receive from the markets. We also see, of course, negative developments. While they are trying to sustain the business, they are also trying to make sure that some always, I'm not talking about each and everybody to make this sure. I'm talking about the whole range that we are observing. but we also have bribery attempts when auditors are being attempted to be bribed in order to make the audit pass, and so on. So this is also there. With regards to reactions from brands, yeah, we also see positive reactions, and very often it's smaller brands as well who have a supply chain that they can manage pretty well because they have either a very good overview, or brands that have done proper segmentation of their supply chain and hence focus with different measures depending on the impact and the risk that they have with the suppliers. So we see a lot of good examples. As Matthias just said, some of the brands are really trying to support their suppliers with regard to making commitments to orders. We have seen brands who have taken over the whole production that have already been ordered, even if it has been only in the cutting phase. So these examples are also there. In general, I would also agree to what Jürgen has just said. There's a lot of focus on the brands, but I think together, and there's also a role of brands. But there's also a role that suppliers, that vendors play, and then the governments. They really need to step in as well. They play a crucial role, and this should not be neglected as well. So.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Maren. I think let's have one more short round of questions on it. Maybe let's talk about the future. So you already started to talk here and there a little bit about the future of the fashion industry or the future of brands. So there has been a lot of talk regarding expected changes of the industry, and many people say there is no way back to the past or back to the normal situation. So once the dust settles, what can be done to rewire the fashion system? Maybe Matthias, you would like to go first?
Yes, well, why not? How much time do I have to answer this question? Because I think this is a
some generous 3 minutes.
No, joking. Because rewire this fashion system, I think rewiring is the wrong word. I'm in this industry now for 25 years. And I've seen where we ended up now with when COVID-19 all of a sudden showed us immediately the flaws in the system, what we had. And when I started, it was more about the quality of a certain product. And now it's about quantity, price, efficiency. So we have really stripped this industry so much down that it's not about the individual garment anymore and how this is being produced. And if I were up to rewire it, then I would say that this is the point where we need to start. We are a bit in not in a symmetric competition anymore. Competition is good among sportlers and among companies. Competition needs to be there in one thing, but it's not symmetric anymore. And that's where I agree a little bit with Jürgen as well. That's when we say, of course, there needs to be some legislative branches giving us some guidance, and we are let alone in this battle, and then everybody does as he pleases. And some people treat this ethically, like what we try to do, and some take this not so serious. And I think this is at the end of the day where you hit the nail on the head is you need rules. Europe has a beautiful big market, so why don't we apply rules like supply chain rules? So what kind of products are allowed to enter our European market, and don't let importers, brands, retailers alone, and everybody decides on their own rules. That would, for me, be the only chance to rewire the system in a more ethical and social and also ecological way. As I said, I lived in Asia for 8 years, and I've seen this myself on what has been done on an ecological compliance level, what we have achieved already. But still, then and again, it's on free will basis. So I don't necessarily, if I don't want to, I don't necessarily have to do this. It's for some brands, they try to do it. We said no, we want that. We do want that, and it would be for us as a small brand a big help, of course, if the rules are symmetric, if everybody has to follow the same guidance, the same level. Ending this, I would just say, in banking, there is a system called Know Your Customer. And for us as fashion retailers, I believe we need a system which is called Know Your Supplier. and not only the tier 1 supplier, which is sometimes very nice to see, but we have to go down the complete supply chain. So transparency in the supply chain, knowing who does what, who's responsible, what is key to improving it.
So level playing field, have some legislative rules, and last but not least, KYS, I think, then know your
KYS,
supplier.
I would call it. KYC, it's in banking, exactly. So I would call it KYS. And then, yeah, I believe then as good sportsmen, we can then go again into competition, because you wouldn't play soccer without having rules. Yeah, then that's not soccer.
Okay, maybe we could talk about that later again, Matthias. But Maren, the crisis is a catalyst for that will shock the industry into change. We see changes coming. There will be no way back to the new normal. What can be done to make our industry more resilient, and maybe how does Elevate actually support your clients in that regard?
Yeah, thank you. I think I want to echo Matthias again here. I think first of all, maybe we want to acknowledge that we do not want a way back to the past, because I think this industry really has been subjected to a number of things that are really difficult to accept. On the procurement side, there's relentless time pressure, there is margin pressure, and despite all the social compliance programs and environmental programs that we see, there are really numerous and very serious violations of human rights along the supply chain. There's a destruction of environment. It's a dirty industry. We also have the same issue on the consumer side, which is also difficult to accept. There's always this underlying message that you need to have the most updated, the most fashionable thing to be beautiful and to have a happy life. It's supported by influencers, by celebrities. So I think, I don't want to say it's a sick industry, but it has a lot of issues, and we should really want to consider whether we see this crisis as a chance to sit down and rethink what we are doing and what we can do better. What is essential? I think it is really essential to take human rights due diligence really seriously, because with a proper human rights due diligence process, you can help companies, you can help the companies mitigate their risk towards the employees, towards the communities, the supply chains. So along the supply chains and stakeholders, and also to manage legal and financial risk more properly. So I think it's been a buzzword in the last years, and and with buzzword, I don't want to say it has not been taken seriously, but we have to take it even more seriously, because it really makes for better run companies. The question is what Matthias also just raised, the question, or Jürgen, sorry, was it with regard to mandatory due diligence? I think this question is not going to go away, whether there should be mandatory due diligence. And if you see that just this week there was a group of investors that have, I think, 5 trillion in assets together, that were calling for mandatory due diligence and stronger involvement of governments. So that is a lot of food for thought, I think. And Elevate, how do we support our clients? Generally, I can say that in Elevate, we do not think in single measures, like do an audit here and draft a policy there. But it's important to have really holistic programs that address the issue. And here we come back to the due diligence protest. So identify where the risks are, and then identify where the risks are in your particular supply chain, and then knit and develop a program around that. And in Elevate, we think in these programs, and we have a lot of tools that starting from assessment, from consulting tools, a lot of analytic tools and programs that we are running to support our clients in this process.
Thank you, Maren. Jürgen, the coronavirus, I hear from our two other speakers, is a chance to maybe rethink, to rewire, to reassess the industry. You are having all the stakeholders in your partnership for sustainable textiles. So what is the conversation in the partnership? I mean, you know the big players, you know the small players, you know the influential players, you know the dreamers, you know the realists. So can you share a little bit off the record, only 185 people listening, minus you, some insights? We won't tell anybody. We only record it.
Yeah. Between us, yeah, okay. I think to start off is I think we all agree upon that the boat has been thoroughly rocked and is still being rocked, and it can be seen as a window of opportunity to push a few things through that that were not going forward quick enough in the past, when everything went along the efficient dogma. Efficiency ruled everything, and squeezing margins across the board, as Matthias and Maren both told us. So I think we have now a situation where change is possible. The question is in what direction change will go. I believe that the tools, and Maren mentioned the due diligence approach, most of the tools for change and also for the management of supply chains are there. I would like to mention the OECD due diligence guidance for the industry, which is our Bible in the partnership, but has still quite a few reluctant uptakes, if to say so. I think this will get a boost, be it from the discussion about mandatory due diligence or not mandatory due diligence. I think it's just the time is ripe for this concept to really spread and be accepted as a common language. Secondly, I think there are a few trends that are also discussed in the partnership for years now, and controversially discussed. I think there is a strong business case for the topics of transparency and accountability to drive change. So this will be one very important topic. The second very important topic, which we are also discussing with the other multi-stakeholder initiatives we are partnering with, is the concept of partnership. So there has to be something in for it, for driving to change for all actors, not just the brands and retailers in European and German market, but also for the producers around the world. So I believe personally also that there will be a drive for partnership. Thirdly, there will be, and this is also what we hear, and also it gives a few empirical foundation for that already, is that the topic of conscious consumption and sustainability is not going away. So when the dust settles, the topic of sustainability, of climate resilience, of sustainable materials will still be there, and probably more so than it has before. This might also lead, and we have to take this into account, to less consumption, which also will have some side effects, we think. And what I also think, what we are also discussing within the partnership is, beside the due diligence approach, transparency, accountability, that we, and also quite a few of our members, think in that direction, that there will be a rewiring, to repeat the wording of the supply chains towards more regionalization, and also to increase the resilience of supply chains across the board.
Thank you, Jürgen. I think it's high time that we are going to start our Q&A. However, I would like to know from our audience, what is their take about the future. So I hope you can see the question. So do you think that the crisis will ultimately be a boost for more socially, environmentally, and economically responsible business practices when we reach post-corona times? So just would like to get a feel from our audience. So please, your gut feeling, don't overthink it. And then I will show you the results. And in the meantime, we are going to now have about 20 minutes for Q&A. I saw a few interesting questions coming in on the Q&A box. So hopefully we can address many of them. And I will ask my 3 speakers, if possible, to be to the point so that we can take as many questions as possible in 20 minutes. And sometimes I'm not 100% sure who wants to answer, so we can also always have maybe more than one taker. But let's try to answer many. I will close the poll now, then you have 20 seconds left to answer and see how optimistic in this perspective our audience is. And if so, I can show the poll results in a second. And apply. So I hope you can see it now because it looks different on my screen. Yeah, so everybody has an opinion, I see. So I'm based in Bangkok. We say hasip, 50-50. But I think the optimists are more than the pessimists. So that's good to see. And I will now close the poll. I hope it's gone. And we are going straight to the Q&A. And I start actually, I think our speakers, you can actually see the Q&A questions as well, I hope, if you open the Q&A box. Otherwise, there is, I think, a colleague from NGO. I would like to know the guidance on awareness or suggestion on workers' entitlement during the pandemic. In China and ASEAN countries, we found a robust anxiety and need of a complaint mechanism grievance in our hotline. Is there any taker on this question? It's a difficult one. I started straight away with a difficult one.
Yeah, can you repeat it? But I think I can take it, Joost.
Yes. Okay. So I would like to know the guidance on awareness or suggestion on workers' entitlement during the pandemic. In China and ASEAN countries, we found a robust anxiety and need of a complaint mechanism of grievance in our hotline.
Okay. I think that probably Jürgen will also or may also want to say something about it, because it really feeds into the long-lasting discussion about effective grievance mechanism and helplines. And for example, in Elevate, together with the Khan Foundation and Fulki, we are running a helpline in Bangladesh and the Amada Kota. And the Amada Kota has received thousands and thousands of calls. I mean, they receive thousands of calls every month anyway, but we have seen a very high spike during the COVID-19 pandemic crisis. And I think this reflects the need for proper grievance mechanisms and helplines so that the workers have a place where they can tend to, where they can have questions. It's an inherent right that they have. And I think this is something that must be pursued much more aggressively from brands and also the supplier side.
Mm-hmm. Maybe let's keep it there, and I go straight to the next question from Namit Agarwal from India. There is a worrying trend in India, and other countries might follow, in exempting industries to comply with key labor laws. This will derail years of work on labor rights. What can brands do in such a situation by engaging with governments? And the question is addressed to Matthias and Maren. Hey, Matthias, you want to respond?
Well, I see this danger as well, because if this whole fashion industry deteriorates in such a way that a lot of capacities are unused, and the price war will tug in, and that will of course have an effect on labor laws. And what can we do is, well, what we say is, that's what I said earlier, we need rules and guidances in our system. Right now is a lot of based on free will, and I believe free will is not really working here. So once we have rules and guidances, government rules and guidances, I believe, yeah, we are much better off, and then these labor rights can be protected much better than it is right now. A small brand like us, we might look into it, other brands might not. So then this is, I think, the flaw in the system.
Mm-hmm. Maren, quick add-on.
I think here the power of the many really plays a role, because one brand alone is playing a lost game here. So I think the initiatives like the Textile Alliance or the other joint initiatives that are around are a good way to bundle forces and then raise their voice if they don't agree with the government decisions, like in India, and we observe it in other countries as well, that labor laws are being exempted. So I think join forces and raise your voice.
Mm-hmm. Jürgen,
yeah, maybe I can step in on that one. This is actually something that we do if we are informed accordingly, together with other multi-stakeholder initiatives. If these kind of topics that are more on the political and government level are being raised, we sit together with the ETI, with FLA, with the Fair Wear Foundation and others, and preparing some response to that. Question is if it really helps all the time. We are not sure, but certainly we raise our voice if something like this happens, especially when it goes beyond or beneath ILO labor standards that has been in place, and now somebody is really exempting compliance with ILO key standards, which is a critical development.
The next question I see here might be already partly answered. Do you all think sustainability has been a viable investment, considering all the negative press the brands are getting for fair practices?
Well, we don't see sustainability as an investment, so I don't see any financial return on invest here. For us, that's a must-do, and there's no question about it. And we would continue in the way what we have done in the past. So maybe I get the question wrong, but we don't see any financial return on sustainability. For us, it is in our nature, and we want to continue with that. And yeah, full stop.
Maybe Jürgen, what's your take on that? I mean, you talk with the brands.
Yeah, this is one of our running topics, right? It goes into the direction of greenwashing and really bashing also companies who are more transparent than others, because there's always, I think if you look into this industry, if somebody looks just deep enough, he or she will find something. And I believe this is a very, not to call it toxic topic, but I think an interesting topic. And what I would also say is that there's also the question, does sustainability make companies successful? I think you have to turn it around. I believe that successful companies are also targeting those topics that are usually summarized under the sustainability topic early, because these are mega trends. And those who do that proactively are those that are successful in the long run.
So, so just for our participants, our attendees, I have to choose questions as they come in. It's a little bit overwhelming to read questions while listening to the interesting answers. So Anshu Chawla asks, how should these due diligence and management systems be sponsored and how foots the bill? That's maybe a question for Jürgen and Maren, right? Any takers?
I could start. But what we see is that the due diligence system is not just a cost factor, but also has a return side, because at least in theory, we are coming back to this: what is sustainable and what is successful. It is a management system in the core, and also a way of looking at things with a normative approach: what should be and what should not be. So it's not just, if you're just looking at it from the cost perspective, it will be difficult to isolate it. I believe, and the who foots the bill. That's the question for a new normal situation. So if efficiency and cutting away excess fat or fat at all, then if this tightness in the market still remains, it will be difficult to add cost, except you are willing to do that.
Maren.
I fully agree. I think this cannot be separated. And if you do not take a holistic approach, I mean, everything is interconnected. And you cannot take sustainability or CSR, you cannot carve it out. And if you really want to have a successful business, it's my absolute belief that you have to connect the ecological, economic, and social factors with each other. And for example, all our training programs, we never focus on sustainability or social compliance issues only, but everything will be taken into account, be it production, be it quality, and so on, because you cannot separate it. And I think it's really essential to integrate the sustainability measures into the operations and into your business, so that you really have business-driven sustainability.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. There is an interesting question from Joe Sutcliffe. Force majeure clauses have been used to avoid payment of existing orders by some brands, but legal advice suggests that the use of these clauses is legally questionable. Is there a need for a fundamental shift in the nature of brand-supplier contracts?
Most likely, I guess what he's applying to is force majeure, and then again that people or companies are looking for a niche to cut off orders in order to stay afloat and to have liquidity savings. I don't know whether, we do have rules here, but I believe that the interpretation of these rules is different. So, of course, this is a force majeure, but I cannot hide behind my responsibility here. So I ordered something before Corona, and then of course it's legitimate that I need to take it even during Corona times. So that is, we have 100 customers approximately. That is what we have taken up to all our customers and discussed with them individually. And not all these talks are nice, and not all these talks are easy. So I would say, it is very difficult to find general rules in this one. So it is, again, partnership and collaboration with your partners on the customer side and on the supplier side, and then finding the best way on how people can survive. And we were very fortunate that we could motivate all our customers to keep their orders afloat.
Mm-hmm. Any other comments, quick ones? Okay. So actually, I see a glass bowl question by Vutika Hang. By our best and optimistic estimate, brand's perspective, by what timeline will consumers go back to shopping at the retailer stores, especially in the EU and US market? Maybe more concrete, Matthias, in your forecast, or Jürgen, what you hear with talking to your clients or partners, what is the scenario you are dealing with right in the moment?
Living in Germany, I don't see it this year becoming to an old normal. So I really don't see it now. Going shopping with masks in your face, and people are afraid of each other, and you have social distancing and all this in place, and even e-commerce cannot hold up and cannot close this gap of what is missing. So I would say 2020 is gone, and I'm also not so optimistic that this massive amount of consumption will come. Optimistic is the wrong word. I'm rather hopeful that it will be more of a, how do you say this, consensuous consumption, that we rather buy a little bit less and a little bit better quality. So I think what was, that was, and the new normal will show that there is less consumption, hopefully.
Mm-hmm. And the glass bowl question to everybody. What's your forecast, your estimation? What is the scenario you have in your head?
Will echo what Matthias just said.
Mm-hmm.
Stop.
That's legitimate. And same for Maren? Or?
Yeah, it's really a glass bowl question. We do get, and it's early. I mean, the opening has just slowly started, and I can talk about German customers, but we also have a lot of customers from other areas in the world, like the US, and we have pretty diverse responses. We have some customers who tell us 2020 is gone, but we also have customers that tell us it will take like 3 months and they will be back or they will have caught up with what they have lost during a lockdown of XYZ weeks, depending on the state where they are in. The latter one is definitely the exception, but we have this feedback from customers as well.
Mm-hmm. Maybe another question to you, Maren. Do you think ecological issues that we have been achieving in the recent years will get more focused by customers? And is a pandemic even opening potentials for working to drive environmental improvements? These are actually two questions in one. Let me see if you see that. Yeah, so the first question, do you think ecological issues that we have been achieving in the recent years will get more focused by customers? I hope that this question is this clear to you?
You mean whether the customers will demand more ecological actions from brands?
That's my assumption. Yes, I remember you have to work on an assumption. Yeah.
That's my understanding, and I hope the answer is yes. And definitely, if I were a brand, I would put a very, very strong focus on this aspect.
Mm-hmm. So let me take a question everybody can answer, and then maybe we start wrapping it up, because we still have Dr. Stephen Frost with some final takeaways from our conversation coming up. So I take the question from Walter Zambotti here. What are, in your opinion, the best short, medium, and long-term solutions the government and the different suppliers should take in order to alleviate the consequences of this pandemic? So it's a little bit kind of summary, or your let's say the golden nugget you want to provide to our attendees today. So you can choose if you want to give one for each, one for short, medium, and long term, or if you just want to highlight 1-2 points again. We'll have a new one.
Yeah, I would say I would put it more general. Focus on your strengths. Look at your suppliers. Know your supply chain. Work in partnerships, and don't start this price hopping and hopping around. Just do what is best, what is ethical and ecological.
Maybe Jürgen.
Yeah, that's the all-in question, right? Short, medium, and long, with everything. So I would stress a few topics. I believe that next year the industry will still be in this phase of a transformational shift. I don't think that it will be over. How to alleviate the consequences is really a joint effort of all actors. So there is a role for governments stepping quickly in if they can, to their abilities, to somehow alleviate the short-term consequences like loss of income and whatever, if possible at all. This should be supported by companies, and then we are talking about in the long run how should an industry look like that is able not only to pay for the hand-to-mouth thing in a day-to-day survival, but also allow for something like a living wage, to put the term here on the table. And this living wages also includes paying for a social security system that makes a society more resilient. But these are the big questions for another situation we are striving for.
Jürgen, thank you. Maren, maybe you take a shot. You are still on mute, yes.
Yeah, I was still on mute. Yeah, I think my wish and my hope is that we really take it as a chance to have a green recovery from this crisis and a social recovery. And I can only echo what has been said, but I think when we talk about the government supporting and governments giving subsidies and the role of governments and stimulus packages and all that, I think this should really strictly and consequently be tied to sustainability issues. And I think that is a real chance to promote the changes. Unfortunately, we have to say that the garment industry and the history of industry has shown that changes are not very likely, and maybe it really takes such a big crisis and such a big role of governments to change that. So my hope is that the subsidies and the packages will be tied to social and economical requirements.
I wanted to go over to our commentator, but I see one question I think that's very, very interesting. Do you think that the brands will allow the manufacturers to sell the garments made for them to sell in domestic markets or any markets without any label or their own private label?
I'm not sure I understood the question. So are we as a brand allowing manufacturers to sell garments in their home country if it's not with a label? So if it's free?
If they don't take, I mean, that's probably also a question. Maybe you took your orders, Matthias, you mentioned, but
we took our orders, but of course, if there's no trademark in it, then of course they can sell it somewhere in some other countries. Why should I oppose to that? But I think that is making, again, for some people, making it very easy to refrain from taking the orders if I allow my makers just cut off the and sell it away. But there should not be an issue about this. So if there's no registered trademark in it, legally, there shouldn't be an issue. But it help. I guess the market, the global market is now flooded with goods. It was flooded with goods before, which are of no need, and now there are even more out there. So the price of a good which is not ordered from someone is next to nothing. So, I don't think that this is a good cure.
Okay, maybe let's stop here. Thank you so much, all three of you, for the time being. We have one person we asked to listen in very carefully, and we asked him to maybe come up with 3 key takeaways. Before I introduce him, I also wanted you to keep in mind that we are having a last poll or survey we really would like you to help us to fill out. And it's of utmost importance for the organizers. So don't go away. We're going to finish on time. So I quickly want to introduce, and he's already on camera, Dr. Stephen Frost. He's a professor at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, but he's also director at the Go Blue, a sustainability accelerator for apparel and textile companies. And he's also the voice behind the Go Blue blog many of us have subscribed to. So this is a Fashion Sustainable Week in Review, an excellent newsletter or blog you should actually all subscribe to if you want to know what's going on in the fashion industry. And I think it's weekly, right, Stephen? Stephen, you listened very carefully, and I hope we can hear you. What are your 3 key takeaways listening to our speakers and maybe also analyzing the questions coming in?
Okay, hard to summarize this conversation. There's so much being talked about. I'm just going to pick out three things that I think I found really interesting. First one is partnerships are essential. But before we even start talking about partnerships, we need government involvement, we need rules, we need laws, we need legal guidance. The playing field, the ethical playing field has not been level. Some players are ethical, some are not, and we can't keep on in that kind of voluntary direction. Mandatory due diligence is required, and all of the speakers brought up the issue of more government involvement and laws. And I think to kind of round out that point, when we're talking about partnerships, several people mentioned that partnerships have to be for all actors. Everybody involved in the partnership needs to get something out of it and not just the brands. So I thought that was a really interesting point. That discussion's been around for some time, but I think there's real urgency about that now. The second thing comes on from that. And so when it comes to responsible practices, I think it was Maren who said that smaller brands are generally doing better because they have better oversight or overview down through the supply chain. And that really reminded me of something that Professor Schumacher, not the Formula One race car driver, E.F. Schumacher, who was a German-born economist who wrote a book in 1973 called Small is Beautiful, and it had a subtitle of A Study of Economics as If People Mattered. I don't necessarily agree with everything that Schumacher said, but I think the small is beautiful idea will kind of have more resonance today based on that idea that smaller brands seem to have better oversight of what's happening in the supply chain. And what comes out of that, of course, is a whole range of conversations about not just relationships and partnerships, but crucial issues like human rights, environmental conditions, and then the big one, conscious consumption. So there's an urgency too about that. And then finally, I was really struck by something that Matthias said about, the banking industry has know your customer, KYC. Everybody in banking knows this. Now is the time for the fashion industry to have KYS, know your supplier. And I think all the speakers really spoke to that in one way or another, that for too long, many brands, not all brands, but many brands really did not know their suppliers and certainly did not know them enough to be in a position to be able to mitigate this risk when it blew up. As Maren said, look, we had SARS. I've been in Hong Kong for 20 years. I was here when SARS was here. Companies had to develop strategies to deal with that. We didn't forget that, but it seems that a lot of companies outside of Hong Kong either didn't learn those lessons or never bothered to learn them. So know your supplier. Great. I'm going to get a T-shirt with that on, Matthias. I hope you don't take any legal action against me, but that's great. I'm going to stop there, hand back to Jost. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Stephen, for sharing your key takeaways. I'm sure everybody has their own, but I think it helps to learn and to remember things we have listened to. Quick promotion for our next webinar, Tuesday, June 2nd, as Mark said at the beginning, 3 weeks from now. The topic will be business resilience under COVID-19. We're going to organize this in collaboration with the ILO, the Decent Work in Garment Supply Chains in Asia project. Also, Sweden is funding this initiative for the ILO. So it's a collaborative webinar. So we are looking forward to seeing many of you again at this webinar.